Although you're 6 feet under, we know it's not your fault.
When we were at St Margaret's, we looked at the decaying tomb of Halley. Halley? Hawley? Haley? Now, as I said, there are 2 other astronomer royals buried in that churchyard, but Halley is really, really special. Now, you're probably aware of Halley's comet, but he did so much more. If you think about Halley at all, you probably think about him as like this, as a geezer in a big wig. But I want you to rejig that point of view. Even the Biographica Britannica, published just 15 years after his death, couldn't restrain themselves. They said, an uncommon degree of spiritedness and vivacity. So the younger portraits show that he had, let's face it, smouldering good looks. And you shouldn't be thinking of a stay-at-home academic sitting in his observatory looking at the stars or reading books. Instead, you should think of him out there as an adventurer, an explorer like Captain Cook or James T. Kirk or Indiana Jones. This belongs in a museum. As a young man, he dropped out of Oxford University so he could map the southern sky. He was the first person to record the southern sky. The Aztecs were clearly observing the sky before then. Their charting method involved alignments of buildings and pyramids, so not something you could easily borrow from your local library. So convivial was he even convinced Prince Charles to give him some cash so he could make it happen. Have some cash. He took the good ship Paramore, first as a civilian and then as captain, out to the southern seas, to St Helena in particular. There, among other adventures, he was arrested as a pirate who was found innocent. He had a run-in with his crew that resulted in an accusation of mutiny that was tried back in England. In this case, the accused were just given a reprimand.
It's just banter, my lord, just banter.
The real reason behind this is really strange. It seems like the lieutenant in question, who had definitely disobeyed orders to take a particular course, seemed to be against Halley from the beginning. And that seems to stretch back to a bad review Halley gave of the same man's book. It's quite possible Halley wasn't even aware that he'd done that. But that shows you how important he was. He was already back in those days writing reviews of books that changed the whole geographical exploration of the world. Alan, what have you achieved so far in your life? Well, I was one of the last people to watch Succession. Halley, what have you achieved in your life? I mapped the southern sky. Most famously, he predicted the return of the comet that bears his name. People in those days didn't know that comets were on a return orbit and came back at all, but he not only worked out its orbit, but predicted it accurately. Halley didn't live to see it, as the comet didn't return until after he died. Since the comet period is 75 years, if you're lucky enough to see it twice, you're probably too young to appreciate it the first time and too gaga the second time. Most people only see it once, which makes it all the more remarkable that he was able to predict it at all. He was able to work this out using the newly minted equations of gravitation worked out by his friend Isaac Newton. And he was able to do that because it was him that paid for the publication of Principia Mathematica. Yes, he paid for one of the most, possibly the most influential books in all physics. Halley was just one of the giants that Newton based his theories on. He'd already lectured on the reciprocal of the inverse square law, hypothesising that gravitation was based on it, but being unable to prove it. Directly after that lecture, he, Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren, yes, that Robert Hooke, yes, that Christopher Wren. Christopher Wren had a wager for whoever could come up with the proof first, 40 shillings worth of books. Now, Christopher Wren couldn't do it, mostly because at exactly that time he was designing St Paul's Cathedral. Yes, that St Paul's Cathedral. Halley was somewhat distracted because his father had been murdered. I know. Around this time, Halley met Newton and discussed the principles of gravitation, and Newton said he'd already proved it. It was Halley that insisted that he publish. Halley had taken a job as clerk of the Royal Society for £50 a year. He championed the Principia and wanted them to publish it, but the Society didn't want to pay because they'd recently lost a ton of money publishing the history of fishes.
I'm really quite seriously hurt. Seek help.
So Halley paid out of his own pocket. The Royal Society was so pleased with Halley's performance as secretary that they gave him his £50 plus a £20 tip. The tip was paid by value in books of the history of fishes. He was such a fun guy that when Peter the Great from Russia visited, he was seen cavorting with a wheelbarrow. Now, this story is said to be apocryphal. Certainly there are no historical sources that directly say Halley ran through a hedge with Peter the Great in a wheelbarrow. But it's so in character for both of them. This is exactly the sort of thing they do. He liked to have a laugh, he liked to have a good time, he liked to drink, he liked to eat. He published a set of actuarial tables predicting the age at death, allowing the start of a proper market in annuities. This is why we have the City of London. And I'm not even going to go into the submarine, or how he surmised that the Northern Lights were magnetic in origin, or how he showed, perhaps, the proper motion of stars for the first time, or the hollow earth. I mean, this is the stuff I'm leaving out. There's no two ways about it. What a guy. Oh, one final thing. One of the other Astronomer Royals in St Margaret's, John Pond, is actually buried in the same tomb as Halley, and Halley's wife and family. This happened nearly a century after Halley died in 1741. Why, you may ask? Well, it seems Pond was a fanboy and wished it.